July 20th, 1944. Deep within the dense forests of East Prussia lay the most heavily guarded and mysterious bunker in the world, the Wolf's Lair. It was 12:30 p.m. The summer heat was oppressive, and a sticky humidity hung in the air. Inside the briefing hut, Germany's dictator, Adolf Hitler, stood surrounded by his 20 most trusted generals. He was leaning over a massive, heavy oak table, shouting about the crumbling front lines in Russia. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. But no one realized that beneath their feet, resting against the leg of that very table, sat a brown leather briefcase. Inside, there were no documents. There was 1 kilogram of plastic explosives. And the most terrifying part? The chemical fuse had already been crushed. The countdown had begun. Standing in that room was Colonel Claus von Stauffenberg. His breathing was controlled, but his mind was racing. He kept checking his watch. He knew that in just a few minutes, this room, this table, and the world's most powerful tyrant would be turned into ash. But this story doesn't start with the explosion. It starts with the conviction that turned a loyal soldier into an assassin. Claus von Stauffenberg was no ordinary man. Born into aristocracy, he was a true German patriot. In the early days, he too was captivated by Hitler, believing he would restore Germany's lost honor. But by 1942, the picture had changed. When Stauffenberg witnessed the senseless slaughter of German soldiers in Russia and Africa due to Hitler's incompetent orders and the horrific massacres of innocent civilians, his conscience screamed. In April 1943, an airstrike in Tunisia changed his life forever. He lost his left eye, his entire right hand, and 2 fingers on his left hand. Lying in a hospital bed, writhing in pain, he made a vow. He said, "God has left me alive for a reason, to destroy this devil." Germany was losing, and Stauffenberg was convinced that if Hitler lived, Germany would be wiped off the map. A resistance group was already active, but they lacked one thing, a man who could get close to Hitler. Stauffenberg had that access. His new rank required him to report directly to the Führer. This was the opportunity the world had been waiting for. The plan was codenamed Operation Valkyrie. On the morning of July 20th, Stauffenberg boarded a plane from Berlin with his aide, Werner von Heften. In his briefcase were 2 packets of plastic explosives. These weren't ordinary bombs with ticking clocks. They used silent, British-made acid fuses. The mechanism was simple but deadly. A small glass vial containing acid had to be crushed. Once broken, the acid would eat through a wire holder. It took exactly 10 minutes for the wire to snap, releasing the firing pin. Boom! For Stauffenberg, this was a suicide mission. With 1 eye, 1 hand, and only 3 fingers, he had to execute the perfect crime. When his plane landed near the Wolf's Lair, it was 10 a.m. The Wolf's Lair wasn't just a building, it was a fortress of concrete and steel, considered impenetrable. There were 3 separate security zones. At every zone, SS guards checked passes. Imagine Stauffenberg's state of mind. If a guard at any checkpoint had said, "Sir, please open your briefcase," it would have been over instantly. But luck was on his side. Seeing his uniform and his war injuries, the guards saluted him and waved him through. He had walked right into the belly of the beast. The meeting was scheduled for 1 p.m., but suddenly news arrived that Mussolini was visiting. The meeting was moved up by 30 minutes to 12:30 p.m. This sudden change threw Stauffenberg's plan into chaos. He excused himself to a changing room to arm the bomb. He had 2 packets of explosives, 1 kilogram each. The plan was to put both in the briefcase to ensure a blast so massive that no one could survive. But here his physical disability became his enemy. With only 3 fingers on his left hand, he struggled to use the pliers to crush the fuse. Sweat poured down his face. He managed to arm the first bomb, but suddenly a guard knocked on the door. Urgently, "Colonel, hurry up! Everyone is waiting!" In his panic and fearing discovery, Stauffenberg placed only the armed bomb in the bag. He gave the second unarmed block of explosives to his aide. This was the biggest mistake of the war. If he had just put the second block in the bag, even unarmed, the first explosion would have detonated it sympathetically, and Hitler's survival would have been impossible. But now the briefcase contained only half the firepower. Stauffenberg entered the conference room. The setting was wrong. Usually, meetings were held in an underground concrete bunker where the blast pressure would be contained, killing everyone. But due to the summer heat, the meeting was moved to a wooden barrack with large open windows. This was bad news. In an open space, the blast force dissipates. Hitler stood at the center of the table, leaning over a map. Stauffenberg said, "I need to step closer to hear better." He moved right next to Hitler. He slid his briefcase off his shoulder, placing it on the floor, pushing it under the table, leaning it against the inside of the thick wooden leg, just 2 feet from Hitler. The acid was now eating through the wire. Maybe 3 or 4 minutes remained. Stauffenberg signaled Field Marshal Keitel, and "I have an urgent call from Berlin. I must step out." Keitel was annoyed, but let him go. Stauffenberg walked out briskly, never looking back, heading straight for his car, where the engine was already running. Exactly 1 minute after Stauffenberg left, Colonel Heinz Brandt, standing next to Hitler, leaned in to see the map. His foot bumped into Stauffenberg's briefcase. Thinking it was just an obstacle, Brandt reached down, picked up the briefcase, and moved it to the other side of the heavy, solid oak table leg. The situation had shifted. Hitler was on one side, the thick, solid oak leg was in the middle, and the bomb was on the other side. That 4-inch slab of wood had just become a shield. At 12:42 p.m., boom! A deafening explosion rocked the compound. The roof blew off, windows shattered outward, and a fireball erupted. Stauffenberg, watching from the gate a few hundred meters away, saw the destruction. He was certain no one could have survived that inferno. He bluffed his way past the final guard and raced to the airstrip. He sent a message to Berlin. "Hitler is dead. Initiate Operation Valkyrie." But inside the smoke-filled room, the reality was shocking. The heavy table had absorbed the bulk of the blast energy. Hitler's trousers were shredded, his eardrum shattered, his arm burned, but he was alive. He had survived. When Stauffenberg landed in Berlin, he expected to be greeted as a liberator. Instead, he found hesitation. General Olbricht, who was supposed to launch the coup, had frozen. Calls from the Wolf's Lair were reporting that Hitler might still be alive. Stauffenberg took command immediately. He shouted, "Hitler is dead. I saw the explosion myself. The SS is lying." For about 4 hours, the coup seemed to work. Troops began arresting SS officers. It felt like Germany might finally be free. But by evening, Hitler himself spoke on the radio. Once the people and the army heard the Führer's voice, the tide turned instantly. The generals who had supported Stauffenberg just moments ago turned on him to save their own skins. Nazi loyalists surrounded Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators in their own offices. A brief gunfight broke out. Stauffenberg was shot in the shoulder. By midnight, it was all over. The uprising had failed. General Fromm, who had initially been part of the plot, immediately ordered the execution of Stauffenberg and 3 others to cover his own tracks. In the darkness of night, they were dragged into the courtyard of the War Ministry. The headlights of an armored car provided the only light. The 4 men were lined up against a pile of sand. The firing squad raised their rifles. Stauffenberg, staring death in the face, did not close his eye. Seconds before the shots fired, he shouted with his last breath, "Long live our sacred Germany!" The rifles cracked, and the last hope for a different Germany fell to the ground. What followed was a purge darker than anyone imagined. Hitler's revenge was brutal. He didn't just kill the conspirators, he arrested their families, their children. Nearly 5,000 people were executed in connection with the plot. Some were hung by piano wire, their deaths filmed for Hitler to watch.